Excuse me, you can't deny a mandatory HOA inspection. I demand access, shrieked Brenda Kensington, HOA president and full-time boundary invader. She stood mid-tantrum at the foot of my gravel driveway, flanked by two uneasy HOA volunteers, when my wife Chloe calmly held up her badge. Actually, Chloe said, pulling out a thin manila folder, you're the one trespassing on federal property, and if you'd like to talk, you'll need a warrant. She flipped it open. Brenda's face drained of color. There it was, her own name, printed neatly atop an unsealed federal warrant. I'm Arthur Mitchell, a quiet engineer with a weakness for cold brew and Norwegian crime novels. My sanctuary was a cozy, self-built cabin, nestled deep in the forested edge of Cedar Ridge Summit. A so-called rustic community run by an overzealous HOA. I kept to myself, paid dues on time, and installed a composting toilet without incident. But that piece seemed to invite the wrong kind of attention. Brenda Kensington, our HOA president, spiritual descendant of Nurse Ratched. And the woman who once fined a man for hanging wind chimes in an emotionally aggressive manner had found her next obsession: cabin inspections. Mine was next on her clipboard, supposedly part of a quarterly rustic compliance initiative. I declined. She cited bylaws. I told her to leave. Brenda countered by hiking up the ridge with binoculars and a digital thermometer, claiming it was for safety. Then came the emails. We're concerned about mold. Some residents reported smoke smells. Do you house bees? What Brenda didn't realize was that Chloe, my wife, wasn't just a calm woman who baked sourdough and kept succulents alive. She worked for the U.S. Marshals Service. And she didn't take kindly to bullies hiding behind fake authority and printed codes like magic spells. The trouble started on a Tuesday morning. Brenda marched up my driveway holding what looked like an official property assessment form, with the confidence of someone who'd never heard the word no. Arthur, we need to discuss your cabin's compliance status. I was sipping coffee on my porch, watching two cardinals fight over birdseed, enjoying the kind of peace that makes rural life worth it. What compliance status? She pulled out a laminated card that looked suspiciously homemade. I'm authorized under Section 12. Talk to 4 of the community guidelines to conduct structural assessments. I'd read those guidelines cover to cover when I bought the property. Section 12-4 was about pool maintenance. Brenda, that's about chlorine levels. She huffed, offended. Well, it's been updated. Her audacity was almost impressive. 2 days later, she returned with backup. A jittery man named Leo and a clipboard-wielding woman who looked like she regretted every decision leading to this moment. Arthur, we've received multiple complaints about your cabin, Brenda announced. I was replacing a loose board on my deck, the kind of normal maintenance that apparently qualified as suspicious activity in Brenda's world. What complaints? I asked. Leo cleared his throat. Well, there have been reports of unusual sounds. Brenda cut in. Hammering at odd hours, loud music, possible illegal construction. The hammering was me fixing the deck they were standing on. The loud music was Norwegian folk songs played at normal volume. The illegal construction was a bird feeder I'd hung last month. But Brenda wasn't done. She pulled out her phone and started taking pictures like she was documenting a crime scene. Is this structure permitted? She asked, pointing at my perfectly legal, professionally inspected cabin. Yes, Brenda. I showed you the permits last year. She ignored me and kept snapping. And this composting toilet? Are you sure it meets county standards? It was installed by a licensed contractor and passed 3 separate inspections, I said. She scribbled on her clipboard. We'll need to verify that. The woman with her whispered something to Leo, who nodded nervously. I was starting to understand why the previous HOA president had fled to Florida. Things escalated when Brenda expanded her investigation beyond my property. She started questioning my neighbors about suspicious activity from my cabin. Mrs. Sterling, who lived across the trail, told me Brenda had knocked on her door asking about strange smells and fire hazards. Those smells were my morning coffee and the occasional grilled cheese sandwich. The fire hazards were presumably my fireplace, which I used exactly as intended for warmth and ambience. Then came the night visit. I was reading in my living room when I heard footsteps on the porch. Through the window, I saw Brenda with a flashlight peering through my curtains. When I opened the door, she jumped back like a guilty teenager. "Arthur, I was just checking for carbon monoxide leaks," she stammered. She was holding what looked suspiciously like a TV remote. "Brenda, it's 9:30 at night." She squared her shoulders. "Emergency inspections can happen any time under the new safety protocols." I frowned. "What protocols?" She waved her fake device. "The ones approved at the last emergency board meeting." There hadn't been an emergency board meeting. I knew that. I actually read the minutes. The breaking point came when Brenda enlisted her adult son, Tyler, to help with what she called enhanced surveillance. Tyler, who looked like he'd rather be gaming, set up a folding chair at the edge of my property and sat there for hours with binoculars. When I asked what he was doing, he muttered, "Monitoring compliance activities." "And that means?" I asked. He shrugged. "Mom says I need to watch for code violations." I looked at this 20-something kid watching my cabin like it might suddenly sprout illegal extensions. "Tyler," I said, "what code violations?" He pulled out a laminated sheet and read aloud, "Unauthorized modifications, improper waste disposal," and he squinted. "Excessive bird attraction." I stared at him. I'd put up one bird feeder. Apparently, that qualified as excessive. When Brenda showed up unannounced the following week, clipboard in one hand, bolt cutters in the other, Chloe met her at the base of the driveway. This time, Brenda hadn't come alone. She'd brought Leo, the clipboard woman, and 2 new recruits I didn't recognize. It looked less like an inspection and more like a low-budget invasion. "Arthur, we need immediate access to conduct the mandatory safety inspection," Brenda barked. Chloe stepped forward, still in her marshal's office work clothes. "Ma'am, do you have a warrant?" Brenda's laugh was sharp and self-assured. "This is my jurisdiction. I don't need a warrant." That's when Chloe turned and walked inside. A moment later, she came back with a slim file folder she'd been holding on to for weeks. "You see, Chloe doesn't just work for the U.S. Marshal Service. She's very, very good at it. And when someone like Brenda starts throwing fake authority around to make people miserable, Chloe notices." Months earlier, she'd run Brenda's name through the system, just out of curiosity. What she found was enlightening. 3 years ago, Brenda had used her HOA title to create a fake business license in a nearby county. She'd pretended to be a government official to help someone skip proper licensing procedures. Chloe had quietly forwarded that to a federal task force for identity fraud. And just this week, that case came back active, with an open federal warrant for impersonating a government official. The federal government takes that sort of thing very seriously. Using fake authority to sidestep legal processes isn't just unethical, it's a felony. And Brenda had done it in writing, with signatures and counterfeit letterheads she designed herself. Chloe had copies of everything: the forged documents, the phony seals, even emails where Brenda proudly signed off as county licensing coordinator. It was the kind of airtight evidence that makes prosecutors grin. The change in Brenda was instant and spectacular. She went from self-righteous HOA tyrant to stammering suburban mom in about 3 seconds flat. "That's not, I was helping the community," she blurted, voice cracking on community. Chloe remained calm, professional, every bit the seasoned marshal. "Ma'am, you represented yourself as a county official to approve a contractor's license. That's a federal crime." Brenda's volunteers began inching backward like she'd just announced she was contagious. Leo looked like he might faint. "I was just trying to help Bob start his landscaping business," Brenda offered weakly. Chloe held up her phone. By falsifying government documents to do it, the bolt cutters slipped from Brenda's hand, clattering onto the gravel like a punctuation mark to her downfall. But Brenda wasn't done yet. She tried one last pivot. This is harassment. You're abusing your position to intimidate a volunteer. Chloe smiled faintly. Ma'am, I'm off duty. This is a citizen's arrest based on an active federal warrant. She showed Brenda the paperwork. You have the right to remain silent. Brenda's face cycled through colors, red, white, and a pale, nauseous green. You can't arrest me. I'm the HOA president. Chloe was already on the radio, calling for backup. That's not a real position of authority, ma'am. And even if it were, federal law outranks HOA bylaws. The next 20 minutes were surreal. Brenda alternated between demanding to speak to Chloe's supervisor and insisting it was all a misunderstanding. I never said I was a county official, but Chloe had the proof. In this email, she read, "You signed as Brenda Kensington, County Licensing Coordinator. That's not a real title, and you don't work for the county." Brenda tried another angle. "I was just streamlining the process." Chloe shook her head. "You created fake credentials and charged someone $300 to process a license application. You had no authority to handle $300. Brenda had been running a side hustle using her HOA title to convince people she had government clearance. When the sheriff arrived, Brenda made one last desperate attempt. "This is about my cabin inspections. She's retaliating because I found violations." The sheriff, a patient man named Deputy Lawson, looked at the warrant, then at Brenda. "Ma'am, this is for events from 3 years ago. Has nothing to do with any cabin." Brenda opened and closed her mouth like a stranded fish. But Lawson was already reaching for his cuffs. "Ma'am, you need to come with me." That's when Brenda completely unraveled. "This is unconstitutional. I demand a lawyer. I demand to speak to the real authorities." Chloe, who quite literally was the real authority, just watched as Brenda was guided into the back of the patrol car. Brenda continued to protest, claiming deepfakes, framing, and government conspiracies. But Chloe had body cam footage, time-stamped photos, and even a witness statement from a former HOA treasurer who now ran a dog-walking business called Snitch and Fetch. By the time the sheriff drove away, Brenda was still screaming about constitutional overreach and deep state compost toilets. I stood on my porch, sipping coffee, watching 3 years of petty tyranny finally catch up with her. At the next HOA meeting, live-streamed by popular demand, I gave a short presentation titled Boundaries, Warrants, and Why You Leave Married Men's Cabins Alone. Chloe sat beside me, calmly knitting a scarf that read BYOB, I bring your own badge. Brenda's resignation was immediate and tearful. The new HOA president introduced one simple rule. If the property has no smoke, bees, or bodies, leave it be. The room erupted in applause. Brenda pleaded down to community service and to years probation. Ironically, she was assigned to clear the trail overgrowth behind my cabin. Chloe occasionally waved from the porch. The woman who'd spent 3 years trying to inspect my composting toilet was now picking up literal garbage with inside of it. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. The first day she saw Chloe, Brenda turned so red I thought she might faint. "This is humiliating," she muttered to her supervisor. Chloe just smiled, tightened her yarn, and went back to her knitting.